They entered the arena under the roar of thousands. The sun burned the sand, the sound of metal echoed in the air, and each step could be the last. But the gladiators were not just warriors fighting for survival. They were part of a gigantic system of power, money, and manipulation. Behind the controlled violence of the games in ancient Rome, there was an economic cog that enriched businessmen, politicians, and emperors, while lives were treated as investment. If you like stories told in an intense and revealing way, leave your like now, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. This helps the video reach more people and allows me to continue bringing deep historical and well-researched content like this one. Now get ready, because what you will discover changes completely the way we see gladiators. When we think of gladiators, we often imagine strong men, almost legendary, fighting for honor and glory inside the Colosseum. The image that has remained in popular culture is that of fearless warriors, symbols of absolute courage. But this vision is only part of the story. In reality, most gladiators did not choose that life. Many were slaves, prisoners of war, or convicted criminals. Others even volunteered, attracted by the promise of fame and money. But when they signed their contracts, they knew that they were entering one of the most dangerous professions in ancient Rome. They were trained in special schools called ludus. There, they learned specific combat techniques depending on the type of gladiator they would be. Some used swords and shields, others fought with nets and tridents. Each style was designed to create thrilling combat for the audience. But here's something important: the gladiators were not simply thrown into the arena to die. They were expensive investments. Training them required time, special feeding, experienced instructors, and structure. Their owners, known as lanistas, did not want to lose money easily. This means that not every fight ended in death, as many imagine today. The games were held in large arenas, such as the famous Colosseum in Rome. These events could last for days. There was music, parades, performances with exotic animals, and of course the fighting. The arena was the center of Roman entertainment. For the public, it was pure emotion. For the empire, it was strategy. For the gladiators, it was daily survival. A few became extremely popular. Their names were written on walls, especially in cities like Pompeii. Women admired, men gambled, children imitated their moves. They could become true celebrities of the time. But behind that fame was a hard truth. At any moment, defeat could mean the end. Even if they did not die in every fight, the risk was constant. Serious injuries were common. Infections could be fatal. A gladiator's life was a mix of strict discipline, public exposure, and constant danger. They were not just fighters. They were pieces of a carefully arranged spectacle. And the question begins to arise: if everything was so organized, who really made money from it? Being a gladiator was not just about fighting. It was about living every day knowing that your life had a price. Literally. As soon as they arrived at the ludus, the men lost their old identity. They received intense training, reinforced feeding, and strict discipline. They trained with wooden weapons heavier than real ones, so that in the arena their movements were faster and more precise. The routine was strict. Survival depended on it. But there was something even harder: the contract. Some voluntary gladiators signed agreements accepting physical punishment, imprisonment, and even death if necessary. It was an extreme commitment. In return, they received the chance of fame, money, and perhaps future freedom. The slaves, on the other hand, had no choice. Despite the danger, death was not automatic. Historical studies indicate that many fights ended when one of the fighters became incapacitated. The audience reacted. The event organizer observed, and the final decision could depend on the sponsor of the games. This sponsor was often a politician or even the emperor. Offering big shows increased popularity. It was a powerful way to gain the support of the people. Injuries were frequent: broken bones, deep cuts, internal lesions. Specialized doctors followed the gladiator schools. This shows something important. There was a real effort to keep these men alive and fit for future fights. After all, each gladiator represented a financial investment. And here is an essential point: the gladiators were divided into strategic categories. Each type had specific armor and style, creating balanced and exciting confrontations. This was not random. It was planning to maximize entertainment. Even so, the risk was constant. A wrong decision, a slow move, a slip in the sand, and it could all be over. Some gladiators fought dozens of times throughout their careers. Surviving repeatedly increased their worth. They could win cash prizes. Some would amass small fortunes. Others would buy their own freedom after years of fighting. But most lived on a thin line between fame and death. It was a profession that mixed military discipline, public spectacle, and high financial risk. While the public vibrated with every punch, behind the stands there was something even bigger going on. A complex economic system where human lives were part of a lucrative cog. And that brings us to the next question: who really got rich from the games? Behind every gladiator there was a man whom almost no one applauded, the lanista. He did not fight. He did not enter the arena, but he was one of those who profited the most from the show. The lanista was the owner of the gladiator school. He bought strong slaves, procured prisoners of war, and even accepted volunteers who wanted to try their luck. Then he invested heavily in the training, reinforced feeding, experienced instructors, doctors, accommodation. Everything had a cost. Training a gladiator was like preparing a modern professional athlete. It took time, discipline, and money, and so every fighter became a valuable asset. When a politician or emperor decided to organize games, he did not have his own gladiators. He rented these men from the Lannis, and he paid a lot for it. The more famous the gladiator, the higher the rent. If the fighter had many victories, the price would rise. If it was wanted by the public, it would be worth even more. Fame generated profit. This means that the gladiator had a direct interest in keeping his gladiators alive and competitive. A dead fighter represented financial loss. A surviving champion represented constant return. In addition, there were bets. Although not always officially recorded, the bets were part of Roman culture. Ordinary people and members of the elite risked money in battles. This moved even more resources around the games. The events also stimulated trade. Street vendors profited from food, wine, souvenirs, and small items related to gladiators. Great shows attracted crowds from different regions, moving accommodation and transport. The games were not just public violence. They were a structured business. Some emperors invested huge sums to perform grand spectacles. The larger the event, the greater the political impact. The arena became a stage of power. By funding impressive games, leaders won popular support. The people through generosity, via free entertainment, via distraction, and this reduced social tensions. While the crowd vibrated, an entire network of people profited. Coaches, doctors, traders, organizers, and especially the arena's businessmen. The gladiators were the visible face. But behind them there was a calculated system, where every fight was part of a financial and political strategy. The arena was a spectacle, but it was also an investment. And when the investment involves thousands of viewers and government support, it transforms into something even bigger, an imperial economic machine. Gladiator games were not isolated events. They were part of something much larger, the economy of the Roman Empire itself. Great spectacles moved the entire city. When there were games in Rome, especially at the Colosseum, crowds gathered from different regions. This meant increased trade, more sales, more circulation of coins. Food vendors profited. Artisans sold small statues and objects with images of gladiators. Tavern owners filled their establishments. Even exotic animal breeders were hired to provide beasts for the shows. The arena generated jobs. Also, organizing grand games was a form of political investment. Emperors financed huge events to gain popularity. When the Colosseum opened, the games lasted for days in a row, with impressive matches, performances, and displays. All of this was costly, but there was a powerful indirect return: social stability. Rome was a city with huge social differences. There was extreme wealth and intense poverty. Keeping the population entertained helped to prevent revolts. The famous bread and circus policy functioned as a control tool. The government distributed food and offered free entertainment. The people felt included. Tension decreased. Meanwhile, important political decisions took place far from the arena. The games also strengthened the image of the emperor as a generous and powerful leader. By sponsoring grand spectacles, he demonstrated control, wealth, and mastery over life and death. But there was another important detail. The battles were carefully organized. It wasn't chaos. There was programming, logistics, financial planning. The arena functioned almost like a modern entertainment company. If you think about it, the games were old-time equivalents of today's big sporting events. They moved money, attracted the public, created celebrities, and influenced politics. And at the center of it all were gladiators, men trained to risk their lives in exchange for survival, fame, or freedom. The economics behind the games shows that it was not just about violence. It was a structured system where each element had a clear function: profit, power, and social control. The arena was a stage, but the real spectacle took place behind the scenes, where strategic decisions turned blood and sand into influence and wealth. And if all this was so well planned, another troubling question arises: did the public really understand the role it played in that system? The arena wouldn't work without the audience. Thousands of people crowded the bleachers, shouting, wagering, vibrating with every move. But without realizing it, they were also part of the system. The games were announced in advance. Posters were spread throughout the cities. Expectations grew. For many Romans, watching the fighting was the most awaited moment of the month. It was distraction, emotion, and belonging. But while the crowd concentrated on the struggle, important political decisions took place far away. The strategy was simple and effective, keeping people entertained and satisfied. When people are focused on the show, they question power less. This practice became known as the bread and circus policy. The government offered food and entertainment. In return, it received support and silence. The arena created a sense of unity, with rich and poor sitting in the same space, albeit separated by specific areas. Everyone shared the same spectacle. This temporarily diminished social divisions. The audience also had symbolic influence. At times, the decision about the life of a defeated gladiator could depend on the reaction of the crowd. Cries, gestures, and pleas for mercy influenced the event organizer. This gave the feeling of popular power, but in the end, the ultimate authority was always the sponsor of the games. The interesting thing is to realize that the audience did not just watch. He consumed. He bought food, drinks, souvenirs. He bet money, talked about the fighters. I created idols. Some gladiators became true cultural phenomena. Their names were known. Their victories were celebrated. His image was drawn on walls. The arena created temporary heroes, but it also created collective distraction. While Rome faced political challenges, economic crises, or military tensions, games served as an emotional escape valve. The question that remains as uncomfortable: was the people only a spectator, or was it also part of the mechanism that kept everything running? The gladiators risked their lives. The businessmen profited. The emperors gained popularity. And the public received entertainment. Each group had a clear role within this cog. And when we look closely, we notice something surprising. Perhaps the arena system is not so different from some modern entertainment industries. For some gladiators, the arena was not just a risk. It was also an opportunity. Although the majority were slaves or prisoners, there were rare cases of men who achieved something almost impossible: freedom. After many victories, a gladiator could receive a wooden sword called ludus. This object symbolized that he was free from compulsory fights. But to reach that point required years of survival. Each victory increased the value of the gladiator. He became more known, more expensive, more demanded. Some accumulated rewards in cash. Others received gifts from admirers. There are historical records of women from the Roman elite who were fascinated by these fighters, seeing in them symbols of strength and resistance. Fame could turn an enslaved man into a celebrity, but this fame had a price. The better known the gladiator, the greater the pressure. The crowd was waiting for a show. I expected courage. I expected blood and emotion. A weak match could disappoint the audience, and the disappointed audience was dangerous for those who organized the games. Some freed gladiators chose to keep fighting even after gaining freedom, because the arena was already everything they knew. It was where they had identity, recognition, and income. This shows something profound. The system did not bind only with physical chains. It bound with fame, money, and purpose. At the same time, many gladiators lived in constant fear. Every fight could be the last. Even the most experienced knew that a single mistake changed everything. Roman society admired these men, but also saw them as marginal figures. They were celebrated and despised at the same time. They were stars and, at the same time, someone's property. This contradiction is powerful. The gladiator could be applauded by thousands and still not have full control over his own life. And here is the strongest point. The system turned extreme risk into a lucrative spectacle. Courage was sold. Pain was turned into entertainment. Survival became marketing. Some achieved freedom. Others never left the arena. But they were all part of a larger cog that blended economics, politics, emotion, and power. And it is exactly this cog that leads us to the final reflection. When we look at the gladiators, it is easy to think that all this belongs to a distant past. Sand, swords, crowds and stone, it feels like another world. But if we look closely, we see that the model created in ancient Rome is still alive, just changed shape. Today, big sporting events move billions. Athletes become global celebrities. Companies invest heavily in training, image, and marketing. Sponsors pay fortunes to associate their brands with the show. The logic is similar: mass entertainment, large investments, and huge financial returns. Of course, there are important differences. Modern sport is regulated and seeks to protect its participants. But the economic framework of transforming human performance into product continues to exist. In ancient Rome, the gladiator was the visible center. Today, we have athletes, artists, influencers, people living under constant pressure, exposed to public trial. The Roman arena showed something powerful. When entertainment, politics, and money mixed together, a force was created capable of shaping entire societies. Games helped maintain social stability. They created distraction. They strengthened leaders. They moved the economy. And this leads us to an important reflection. Do we always notice when we are just spectators? Or do we still participate, even without noticing, in systems that turn risk and emotion into profit? The story of gladiators is not just about fighting. It's about power, about strategy, about how lives can be turned into a spectacle. Some gladiators won freedom. Others died anonymously. Many were forgotten. But the system that surrounded them left deep marks on how entertainment evolved over centuries. Understanding the economics behind the arena helps us to see the past more clearly and the present more consciously. Because, in the end, the real fight was never just between two men on the sand. The real battle has always been for control of narrative, attention, and money. And now I want to know about you. If you lived in ancient Rome, would you watch the games? Or refuse to participate in this system? Leave your opinion in the comments. Your participation keeps this discussion alive. If this video has opened your eyes to a side of the story that almost no one explains, leave your like now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future content, and share this video with someone who loves history. See you in the next episode.